Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I think we're virtually getting ready for the start of this evening. Couple of notes for you all. Coinscrum have released a jobs board for everybody in the space. So far, Eris and Jita have both recruited from the jobs board, so it's worthwhile going to have a look. If you're in the space, if you need to advertise, if you're looking for work, Coinscrum jobs board, place to go. The other thing I have to mention is that videos are now available on the Coinscrum website. That's the other speeches that we've been having this year. Usually have some slide decks on there as well, Toma, don't they? Yes? Good. Now then, tonight we have Aeron from the head of R&D for EtherCore. Now, I think it's an absolute pleasure for us all because, as you were about to see, we've got a genuine Hollywood superstar in Ben Stiller here tonight, ladies and gentlemen. There you go, look at that. I mean, come on. And one final note, can I just say it's very nice to see Mr. Chris Ellis back in the room as well. So good to see you, Chris. And let me hand over to Ben Stiller. Sorry, no, Aeron from EtherCore.
Hi, everyone. Is that working? Yes. Okay, so we're in an exciting time at the moment. So we've got pop-up windows appearing all the time. That's it. Thank you very much, Debbie. Yeah, good times. Blockchains are the word on everyone's lips. There are more blockchains than ever before. I heard last week a rumor of a new blockchain called Lizard Coin being developed by some prominent people in the space. But yeah, there are lots and lots of blockchains. Obviously, most of them we completely ignore because they're all useless, and we realize that. But there are a lot of blockchains that hold a lot of value. So the numbers of blockchains just increases. Now, it helps that it's impossible to kill blockchains by design. So there's a ratchet effect. It's not as if they disappear, because, of course, if anyone's ever interested in resurrecting a blockchain that has been paused, all they have to do is just get the state and start a node, and obviously that chain continues. So I'm safe with this statement. The number of articles in the media just keeps going up. More and more institutions and newspaper outlets are writing about blockchains. It seems to have hit a tipping point last year. 2015 was the sort of year of emergence of blockchain. The key indicator there, I'm sure you all noticed, was that the description went from being Bitcoin. So everyone was talking about Bitcoin. Have you heard of Bitcoin? And there's that evil sort of, dark net association with Bitcoin, and everyone, shh, Bitcoin. And then suddenly, the media, the general zeitgeist, found the term blockchain, and suddenly we could all talk about it. Yeah, blockchain, future technology, great. So that was an important shift last year. And now, by being able to refer to everything using the word blockchain rather than Bitcoin, it seems somehow now reputable and acceptable to talk about it. So we've got the Financial Times talking about it, The Economist talking about it, everyone else. When we get to the Daily Mail, we'll know that we've really made it. So we look forward to that. And there's more and more interest in blockchains. So I'm from EtherCore. EtherCore plug. So EtherCore is the premier provider of Ethereum client software. So if you need any Ethereum client software, EtherCore is the place to go. So there's more and more interest. So I've been part of the Ethereum Foundation, and now I'm part of EtherCore, and we have lots of people coming to us saying, we have heard about blockchains. We are impressed by their capabilities. We'd like to know more. We'd like to integrate, blockchain technology into our systems, et cetera. So the number of people that are interested, the range of people that are interested is growing and growing. So now it covers everything from governments. So the UK government is talking about it. The Dutch government is talking about it. The Estonian government, the Australian government. Financial institutions, obviously, they've always been there, but also supply chain, certification, insurance. You know, the list is now incredibly long. So more and more interest. However, with all this, the amount of misunderstanding about what blockchains can do and how they can help is also increasing. So, you know, the majority of the people that come to ETHCore, come to me, come to the foundation and say, we'd like to do something with blockchains, don't actually need blockchains. And you know, in some ways this is great because, you know, it means that more people are talking about blockchains, which is fantastic. But there's also going to be some major disappointments, and you know, that disappointment potential is building and building. So, you know, we're in this state now where there's more hype than ever before over what blockchains can do, and you know, what the future looks like with blockchains behind it. So, you know, blockchain will cure cancer is only just around the corner. So, you know, quite indisputably, we're in a blockchain bubble. Now, when it will be burst is anyone's guess, but, you know, nonetheless, we've got all of the components for bubble territory, and when it bursts, there's going to be a lot of people crying. But actually, there being a bubble is no bad thing, right? So what I want to talk about a little bit now is what I think is going on, why I think it's not a bad thing, and what will emerge afterwards. So here's a graph. Does that actually work? Yeah. So this, I could have picked many coins, but I've obviously chosen Ethereum, the price of Ether. This is from the launch last autumn. And we've got a definite peak, very bubble-like looking graph going on here. Now, obviously, the bubble hasn't happened yet because it didn't spike and then crash. It's spiked and then stayed stable, which is great for everyone who has Ether, of course. But if we do a comparison to the NASDAQ exchange, so this is a demonstration of, or an indication, or a sort of view on the dotcom bubble of 2000. So it was declared that the dotcom bubble burst in 2000 because that was the peak of the NASDAQ exchange index. And NASDAQ exchange is used as a proxy for the worth of e-commerce companies, etc., simply because it's biased towards technology companies. So it's only a proxy, but you know, it's a good indication. But we can see that there was that peak in 2000 when it reached, the index reached a value of 5,000. And then it crashed, and everyone was like, oh my God, you know, it was awful, all these companies making microphones work have crashed. And, you know, lots of people cried, and lost lots of money. Is that because of this microphone?
Try this new one.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so is that working? Yeah. Okay, so yeah, so there's a big crash, but we can see there's been a recovery. So this is actually to date. So the right-hand side of this graph, this year, the NASDAQ index is now back to that peak level. And I got this this graph from a website, Market Watch or something, and they had an article called "Dotcom Bubble 2.0," and their conclusion was that this growth here is not another bubble. We're not going to see suddenly a massive crash of e-commerce companies. The e-commerce industry, the internet company ecosystem, is now pretty mature, and this is actually a growth actually, due in real terms to profitability and increased productivity in that ecosystem. So the dot-com bubble was a success. And while you could say, yes, a lot of people lost a lot of money, what I'd like to look on it as a procurement mechanism. So procurement is in obtaining the best systems, the best companies, the best technologies to achieve certain things. In this case, it's to achieve efficient and socially productive use of the internet. So back in '93, when the Mosaic browser was launched, if you ask people then, what is the internet for? What is it, what should we use it for? How will it benefit society? You'd have got a huge range of answers. That would have definitely been one of the answers. And a lot of people would have picked out the things that it's now been used for. So e-commerce and social media, connecting people, and porn. Now, the process then, at that stage, so in the 90s up to 2000, as there was, big, huge increase in the number of e-commerce companies, was an exploration of how to use the internet. And no one knew the actual answer, and we know the answer now. We've got the big companies that we all use every day. But back then, that was before it all happened, we didn't know what the answer was. So there's a process to go through to work out the technologies, the processes, the companies, the business models and everything that will work in order to provide value using internet technology. And the cost, i.e. the amount of money that went into, from venture capital, the amount of investments and things, was the cost of finding out which were the best things to do, which things didn't work, which things did work. And you could say, oh, well, this is incredibly wasteful. All of these people lost money and, oh my goodness, so many tears. But, what are the alternatives? So, compare it, an easy target here, Soviet Russia going, right, we know what the answer is, let's deploy this. And, obviously millions of people die as a result. And that was a big cost. Whereas losing millions of dollars, we can cope with that. That's fine. So as a way of working out what to do, a bubble is a relatively efficient way of doing it. The dot-com bubble also validated the notion of first mover advantage. So a lot of the people that survived afterwards were people and companies that invested and deployed early on. And it also validated the notion that traffic, getting users, getting eyeballs on your product or service is a fundamentally important thing. So, Twitter, Facebook, etc., wasn't about a revenue model. It was just about user acquisition, getting people using the system, and then work out how to pay for it later. That really worked. So my thesis tonight is that we are going into a blockchain bubble now, and that this process is a good process. I mean, good, put some sort of moral thing on it, but at the moment, the society of humanity doesn't really have a better way of sorting through ideas and going through that natural selection process of working out how we should be using something. So how should we be using blockchain? Well, let's invest in loads of companies, let's go through all of those ideas and see what comes out the other side. So obviously as insiders, we have the extra knowledge, so we can not be taken by lizard coin scams and instead be the first movers to profit handsomely from delivering society the best value and the best technology. But we've got to remind ourselves what blockchain technology is actually good for. Let's not waste our time going after integrating blockchain into whatever your favorite service provision is. So hopefully you've heard it many, many times, but blockchains are not good for storing or processing data. Blockchains rely currently on the notion that every node in the system, every participant that is running the blockchain holds and processes all of the data that is being put on and processed by the blockchain, which is incredibly inefficient. You know, the throughput is awful. And we're seeing this with the whole block size debate in Bitcoin. So the notion that we should put data onto the blockchain and we should use it like a database is a ridiculous notion. And that counts for about 50% of the ideas that I hear about in terms of integrating blockchain technology. Yes, we will just replace at the back end of our service blockchain technology, and the magic of blockchain will filter through, and you know it will be fantastic. But if you are just replacing something that would be better served with a more performant database, then just use a more performant database. So what does blockchain actually do? Well, there are as many ways of describing what blockchains do as there are commentators on blockchain, but tonight I will present one that hopefully you haven't come across before, which is that a blockchain is a unilaterally accessible pseudo-sovereign monopoly. Now, it being unilaterally accessible is excellent because it means that anyone that wants to use the capabilities of a blockchain can do so purely by their own efforts. There's no registration or outlay on resources or permission to be gained. You just connect to the blockchain. Right? So that's obviously the beauty of decentralization. You know, the internet is the perfect decentralized communication infrastructure. I mean, it's a bit more centralized now, but you can just set up a node that's part of the internet, and then you are helping run the internet. And the same with blockchains. You set up a node, and you connect to the blockchain, and then you are part of the blockchain. Or you can just look at it. You know, just what's the information on this blockchain? Yeah, there we go. Pseudo-sovereign in the sense that blockchains own themselves. Now, at the moment, we still have proof of work as the most valid way of running a blockchain. Now, we hope this will change, but at the moment, we can't see that it will necessarily work without a proof of work system. But nonetheless, we've got this notion that blockchains own themselves. So whatever goes on a blockchain, it's not run by any particular entity, it's run by the blockchain itself, which is a nice attribute for the third part here, that blockchains offer the potential to be a monopoly in a particular domain. And monopolies have fantastic advantages because you don't have any of the inefficiencies of resource duplication. You have a standard, which means that accessibility becomes easier. So the fact that USB is a standard means that we can have more peripherals, you know, including a coffee warmer. Now, you might debate the usefulness of a USB-powered coffee warmer, but the fact that it can exist is excellent because it just, leverages the universal and unilaterally accessible standard that is USB. So, blockchain, and let's take, for example, Ethereum being, in my view, the best and most advanced blockchain that we have. It can do anything, because it has a actually useful scripting language embedded in it. And because of that, anything that you think of, you can run on Ethereum, and it can become a standard that anyone can connect to. So, this is really powerful. Let's leave to one side the notion of upgrading for now, but this is really good. And yeah, so the one thing I forgot to mention there was that the big problem with monopolies as they're traditionally deployed is that they have to be owned and run by someone. And whoever they're owned and run by tends to eventually take advantage of their monopolistic position and spoils the party. Whereas blockchains offer this unprecedented situation where no one owns and runs it. It's a monopoly that owns and runs itself, which is great. So, and I've put pseudo in there, pseudo-sovereign, just because, we're all aware of mining pool controversies and all of Uber has been really successful because it had the first mover advantage, and it's now almost the taxi service provider platform monopoly. But we all don't like it because, Uber is owned by Uber. So, we're obviously all waiting for Uber to be deployed on Ethereum, and then, we'll all have cheaper taxis. And another really important thing that needs to come about is reputation systems, and they're in some ways just an advanced version of token systems. Blockchains also provide the really useful service of being a cryptographic notice board. So because they have cryptography and cryptographic signatures just built in, then you can do things such as hold registries of public keys. And you then can trust that a public key is being maintained by a particular entity outside the blockchain. So blockchains are a ideal candidate for solving our current problem with SSL and the STL certification, because when in the current model, your browser has all of the SSL certificate keys built in, and if they're lost, there's no way of your browser finding out that they've been lost. Whereas if the blockchain is the place you go for it, then they can be revoked and you can have revocation lists, and it can all be managed very nicely. So as a cryptographic notice board, blockchains can deliver certification, which is really good. That, of course, feeds into reputation and the whole notion of identity on the blockchain. So, Estonia's e-residency identity, once that gets onto the blockchain, then we can start opening Bitcoin bank accounts using our Estonian e-residency, which would be quite cool. And of course, the incredibly important aspect of blockchains that will really bring about the infrastructure evolution that we're after is the interoperability. So once a multitude of services exist on a blockchain, particularly a blockchain like Ethereum, which actually has irrevocable logic built in, then we have this interoperability where things feed into each other. So the reputation feeds into the identity, which feeds into the escrows, which feeds into whatever else you're using the blockchain for. And we end up with superlinear gains. So this culminates in distributed autonomous organizations, which will eventually rule the world. Now, marketplaces, and I'm not talking about escrows here. So going beyond a escrow service, which is generally what people are talking about when they say marketplace. Going beyond that and having a full many-to-many service offered where people are exchanging things from currencies to derivatives to rights to various real-world things. That, in my view, requires a couple of features which are still research topics, namely secret sharing with zero-knowledge proofs and whatnot. So that's coming, hopefully, but probably not yet. So a quick example of what I was talking about with regards to interoperability. And I gave a talk to the Dutch government a couple of weeks ago. So I'm using the example I gave them. So it's a little bit bureaucratic, but the principles hold. So the example I used there was with regards to being a student. So you're a student, you're signed up to a university, you want to get your loan, and of course the university needs to tell the student loans company that you're legitimately a student. There's some certification going on there, and then once you've enrolled, then you can start receiving money in your bank account as a student. Now in the Netherlands, they go a bit further, where student loan payments are actually based on your academic success. So if you don't turn up to exams or you don't actually achieve certain grades, then you don't get your student loan. So in the Netherlands, it's even worse. There's a sort of continual cycle of information going on there. And of course, students need somewhere to live, so they need to go to landlords. But in some, this is just a side thought, we could have the situation where students can only use their student loans to buy certain things. It's like you mustn't buy alcohol with your student loan. But landlords for many universities need to be certified of providing accommodation of a certain standard. So, the landlords need to register with some local authority who sets the rules, and the students need to know that certain landlords have been certified. And of course, certification has many elements, lots of professions feeding into that certification. And that chain of certification goes really quite deep into the supply chain. And that supply chain needs itself to be managed by a huge number of organizations, not just the local authority. So it actually goes all the way back to the government, who feeds in and sets all of these standards. Whereas what we really want is just some simplified way of dealing with all of those interactions. So if we're in the current setup, we have this horrible spaghetti exponential cost function on adding a new element into this. So if the government decides that something else needs to be certified, then a new department needs to be set up, and new communication channels need to be authorized, and the cost is very high. Whereas by going via the blockchain, the cost of adding a new element actually gets becomes constant, but the value add of any new element applies not only to the element being added, but also to all of the existing ones there. So if we add a new company, that company can add value to everything else on the blockchain, as well as adding value in the service it provides itself. So by going via the monopoly of a blockchain, the interoperability of the blockchain, we have superlinear efficiencies. So the cost of adding a new element goes down, even though the benefit of adding an extra thing goes up. Right, so what's going to persist? If it happens as I say, and we're going to enter a bubble and everything's going to crash down, and we're all going to be crying because we bought Bitcoin and Ether at peak, and it was all awful. What's actually going to survive? And what I'm saying is that what will survive will be the cream, the stuff that we really need. It's all part of the natural selection process. And I can be a pundit now and suggest some things which I think will be the most important elements of what will survive and what the blockchain ecosystem will be doing in 5-10 years' time. And some fundamental aspects, as far as I'm concerned, are that people that try and implement traditional business cases, traditional business models on the blockchain and try and charge rent for running DAOs or services via the blockchain, they will fall victim to the whole hype cycle, because the blockchain is not traditional. It's a new paradigm, and anyone that's going to survive has to work within this new paradigm. And trying to extract money out of operating on the blockchain probably won't work. However, being the gatekeepers of information flowing onto blockchains probably will, because it's that interaction element which takes a lot of effort to set up and a lot of reputation to build up in order to provide a service that's worthwhile. So being the gatekeeper of information digitization traveling onto the blockchain, that will be worth a lot. Now, it'll be interesting to see which particular data gatekeepers do win out, because we've got generic versions of this through things like Augur and prediction markets, where there's a crowdfunded element on bringing information onto the blockchain. But people, when you go with the wisdom of the crowd, you surrender the range of stuff to what the crowd is interested in. So there'll always be niches where being a sort of niche provider of information will be really quite profitable. And the other major thing might come back to me in a minute, so I'll move on. So will this whole thing be worth the wait? Now, I think it will be a wait. No, we're not going to see the world change fundamentally the end of this year, or even the end of next year. We're going to have to go through a huge amount of experimentation and development, failures and successes before we actually get, the long-term adoption of a blockchain in exactly the same way as happened with the internet. We're really, really early in terms of what the blockchain is doing. This is very much like the internet in the early 90s. The majority of people have barely heard of it. They certainly can't use it. Even if they do know how to get a web browser, it's incredibly clunky and annoying to use. So there's definitely a long way to go, just like there was with the internet in the early 90s. And we're still after the solution to the scalability problem. So at the moment, throughput on blockchains is a problem. And by increasing the block size and what have you, this won't solve it. I mean, we can continue to increase block sizes, but every time we increase the block size, we only increase the throughput linearly. Whereas in order for blockchains to be useful in the way that is envisaged, they need to be able to scale exponentially. So while it's still a chain, it's going to fail. Right? So, Bitcoin isn't the thing. Ethereum isn't the thing. We need scalability. So that's where the idea of sharding or chain fibers comes in. So the idea that blocks aren't arranged in a chain. Blocks are just coalesced in groups and validated in communities which flow and adapt as their interactions dictate. So that's the sort of theoretical vision of what can happen with scalability. And we also need an ability to share secrets with each other in such an open framework. So one thing we all know about Bitcoin is that everything that happens on Bitcoin is seen by everybody. I mean, this is part of the design mandate of the Bitcoin blockchain. And there's the whole pseudonymous aspect, but when we can actually control who knows what, but do it in the same framework of interoperability as we experiencing now with blockchains, then we'll be able to deliver just about anything. So these two things, which you'll hear, a lot about and to varying degrees of progress, are still very much research topics, and they're not going to be ready in any deployable sense for years. So, 5 years is probably a relatively conservative estimate on getting this sort of thing sorted and deployed in a way that we can actually rely on. But, overall, I reckon we're in a good place, and as long as we're mindful of the pitfalls, there's a lot of social and real capital to be made with being part of this ecosystem. Yeah. That's it.